The skeleton they found on the Columbia River wasn't supposed to exist. For decades, scientists told us they knew exactly how the Americas were populated. They had the timeline, they had the route, they had it all figured out. Then they tested the DNA of a 10,000-year-old man pulled from the mud of Washington state, and everything we thought we knew shattered. The thing nobody tells you is that the results were so disturbing, so fundamentally incompatible with accepted history, that it took nearly 20 years of legal battles before scientists were even allowed to study the bones. And when they finally did, the genetic code revealed something impossible. This man, this ancient wanderer who died on American soil 10,000 years ago, had DNA that made no sense. His ancestry pointed to populations that had absolutely no business being in North America. What began as a chance discovery has spiraled into the most controversial rewrite of human migration in modern archaeology. Because if this skeleton tells the truth, then the story of the first Americans isn't just incomplete, it is a lie. And the implications are terrifying. You see, it was July 1996. Two college students were watching a hydroplane race on the Columbia River near Kennewick, Washington. They waded into the shallow water near the shore to get a better view. One of them, Will Thomas, felt something round with his foot. He reached down into the murky water and pulled out what he thought was a rock. But it was not a rock. It was a human skull. The local police were called immediately. At first, they assumed it was a recent murder victim. The Columbia River had seen its share of bodies over the years. When forensic anthropologist James Chatters arrived at the scene to examine the remains, he knew instantly this was no modern crime scene. The skull was wrong. The bone structure was different. When they excavated the rest of the skeleton over the following days, what emerged from that riverbank was a complete mystery. The skeleton belonged to a man who stood 5 feet 9 inches tall. His bones showed evidence of a hard life, multiple healed fractures, signs of significant physical trauma, and the kicker, embedded in his right hip bone, was a stone projectile point. This was not a bullet wound. This was a spear. Someone had tried to kill this man with a weapon made of stone, and he had survived long enough for the bone to heal around it. The weapon itself was a cascade point, a style used by Paleo-Indian hunters thousands of years ago. But the most shocking fact is what happened when Chatters examined the skull more closely. The morphology was completely unexpected. The features did not match modern Native American populations. The skull was long and narrow, with a projecting face and a prominent chin. These are features typically associated with Polynesian or even European populations, not the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest. Chatters was baffled. They needed a date. Chatters sent a small bone sample to the University of California for radiocarbon testing. When the results came back, everyone involved stopped breathing. The skeleton was 9,300 to 9,600 years old. Let that sink in. This man died on the banks of the Columbia River more than 9,000 years ago, placing him among the oldest and most complete skeletons ever found in North America. And his skull looked nothing like the descendants of the people who were supposed to have been living there. This wasn't just an archaeological find. This was a fundamental contradiction of everything we thought we knew about who the first Americans were. What many overlooked at first was that this discovery did not just challenge scientific theories. It threatened to dismantle the entire legal and political framework of Native American identity in the United States. Within days of the age determination, 5 Native American tribes, the Umatilla, Yakima, Nez Perce, Wanapum, and Colville, filed a joint claim under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. They demanded the immediate return of what they called the Ancient One for reburial. According to their oral traditions, their people had been in the Columbia Basin since the beginning of time. This skeleton, they argued, was their ancestor and must be returned to the earth with respect and dignity. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which controlled the land where the skeleton was found, agreed. They ordered all scientific study to cease immediately. But here's the deal. A group of 8 prominent anthropologists, including some of the most respected names in American archaeology, filed a federal lawsuit to block the repatriation. Their argument was simple but explosive. How could this skeleton be proven to be ancestral to modern tribes when no one had been allowed to study it? The physical features did not match, the age was extreme, and most critically, no DNA testing had been performed. This was not just a matter of appearance, it was a matter of fundamental biology. The scientists argued that if this man was not related to modern Native Americans, then reburying him would be destroying one of the most important pieces of evidence about the true peopling of the Americas. They needed to know who he was. They needed the DNA. The legal battle raged for nearly 9 years. During that time, the skeleton, now known worldwide as Kennewick Man, sat in a locked museum storage room. Scientists were not allowed to touch it. The tribes held ceremonies demanding his return. The media descended, turning the case into a national flashpoint about science, religion, and indigenous rights. Finally, in 2004, the courts ruled in favor of the scientists. The judge determined that a cultural affiliation to modern tribes could not be established without proper scientific study. Even after winning the case, researchers had to work under extraordinary restrictions. Every test had to be approved, every sample had to be justified. And the most important test, the one that would answer the biggest question of all, the DNA analysis, was specifically forbidden. The bones were too precious, they said. The technology too destructive. For years, Kennewick Man's genetic secrets remained locked inside his ancient bones. But technology does not stand still. And in 2015, everything changed. By 2015, DNA extraction technology had advanced dramatically. Scientists could now retrieve usable genetic material from smaller samples with less damage. A team led by geneticist Eske Willerslev at the University of Copenhagen, working with the University of Chicago, petitioned for permission to conduct a full genomic analysis. After months of negotiation, they were granted access to a tiny fragment of bone from Kennewick Man's hand. The team worked in sterile, clean room conditions, treating the 9,000-year-old sample like it was made of glass. They were targeting both mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal lineage, and nuclear DNA, which provides the complete genetic blueprint. Ancient DNA is incredibly fragile. It degrades, breaks into microscopic fragments, and is easily contaminated by modern genetic material. A single skin cell from a researcher could ruin the entire result. What they found was impossible. When the genetic sequence was finally assembled and compared against global DNA databases, the results sent a shockwave through the scientific community. Kennewick Man's DNA showed he was definitively Native American. His mitochondrial haplogroup was D4H3A, a genetic signature found exclusively in indigenous populations of the Americas. But here is the kicker. His closest living genetic relatives were not the tribes of the Pacific Northwest who had claimed him. His DNA matched most closely with modern Native American populations from Central and South America, particularly groups from the Colville Confederated Tribes and other plateau tribes, but with unexpected genetic markers. The most shocking fact is what the deeper analysis revealed. Kennewick Man's genome contained genetic signatures that were ancient, a lineage that split from other Native American populations shortly after the initial migration into the Americas. His people were among the very first wave of humans to enter the continent. But the structure of his skull, those European-like or Polynesian-like features that had started this entire controversy, they were not evidence of a separate population. They were evidence of something far stranger. The DNA proved that the earliest Americans did not look like modern Native Americans. The physical features we associate with indigenous peoples today, the broader faces, the distinctive cheekbones, evolved over thousands of years after arrival in the Americas. Kennewick man and his people were genetically Native American, but morphologically different. They were the founding population, and their appearance was closer to the ancestral Asian populations that first crossed into the New World. This discovery demolished the simple narrative. It was not just that one group walked across the Bering Land Bridge 15,000 years ago and became all Native Americans. The story was far more complex, with multiple waves of migration, genetic bottlenecks, and dramatic physical changes occurring over millennia. But the DNA held an even darker secret, one that researchers initially missed in their rush to establish ancestry. Buried in Kennewick man's genetic code was an anomaly. When researchers compared his genome to modern Native American populations, they found something that shouldn't be there: a trace signature, a genetic shadow. It represented ancestry from a population that no longer exists, a ghost lineage that contributed to the earliest Americans, but left no living descendants. You see, the human genome is like a historical record. Every population that contributed to your ancestry leaves a signature, a pattern of genetic markers that act like a fingerprint. Modern Native Americans carry signatures primarily from ancient North Eurasians and East Asians, the groups that mixed in Siberia before crossing into Alaska. But Kennewick man's genome contained an additional component, something older, something that didn't match any known modern population. This wasn't contamination. The signal was too strong, too consistent. It appeared in specific chromosomal regions and showed patterns of inheritance that proved it was real. Scientists labeled it Population Y, a placeholder name for an unknown ancestral group. The data suggested this mysterious population contributed somewhere between 2% and 4% of Kennewick man's total ancestry. Here's the terrifying part. Population Y appears to have been unique to the earliest wave of Americans. The genetic signature gets progressively weaker in later populations and is virtually absent in Native Americans living today. This means Population Y either died out completely, was absorbed into other groups, or something removed them from the genetic record. The most disturbing hypothesis is that Population Y might have been the true first Americans. They might have arrived in the Americas thousands of years before the ancestors of modern Native Americans. When the larger migration wave crossed the Bering Land Bridge around 15,000 years ago, they encountered this earlier population. There was contact, interbreeding, and then, somehow, the original population vanished. This opens a terrifying question. Were they wiped out? Absorbed? Did they flee? Or did something else happen, something the genetic record can't fully explain? The Kennewick man discovery forced scientists to confront uncomfortable evidence that had been piling up for decades. You see, the standard story of American settlement has always been clean and simple. Humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia approximately 15,000 years ago, following herds of mammoth and bison through an ice-free corridor. They spread rapidly south, reaching the tip of South America within just a few thousand years. This was the Clovis First theory, named after distinctive stone tools found at sites across North America. But Kennewick man was too old and too different to fit neatly into this narrative. And he was not alone. Over the past 30 years, archaeological sites have been discovered throughout the Americas that predate the supposed arrival date. Monte Verde in Chile has been reliably dated to 14,500 years ago. Sites in Florida, Texas, and Oregon push back even further, some suggesting human presence 16,000 or even 20,000 years ago. The thing nobody tells you is that some of these early sites contain artifacts that do not match Clovis technology. Different stone tools, different hunting strategies, different ways of life. It is as if multiple groups with distinct cultures were living in the Americas simultaneously, separated by thousands of miles and possibly thousands of years. Then there is the coastal migration theory. New evidence suggests the earliest Americans might not have walked through an ice corridor at all. They might have traveled by boat, hugging the Pacific coastline, island hopping from Asia to Alaska to California. This would explain how humans reached South America so quickly and why early sites cluster near ancient coastlines. But if they came by boat, that requires a level of maritime technology and navigation that we never credited to Paleolithic peoples. Kennewick Man fits perfectly into this messier, more complex timeline. His skeleton was found near the Columbia River, a major waterway. His people likely relied heavily on fishing, not just hunting. And his genetic distinctiveness suggests his ancestors were part of an early coastal migration, separate from later inland groups. What if the standard story is not just incomplete? What if it is deliberately simplified, designed to fit a political narrative rather than scientific reality? For nearly 2 decades, the Kennewick Man case was less about science and more about control. Control over the narrative, control over the bones, control over who gets to decide what history says. The legal battle was not just about one skeleton. It was about whether physical evidence or cultural tradition takes precedence when they contradict each other. Here is the deal. After the 2015 DNA study proved genetic continuity between Kennewick Man and modern tribes, the U.S. government moved quickly to close the case. In 2016, Congress passed legislation specifically to return the remains to a coalition of tribes for reburial. In 2017, Kennewick Man was buried in a secret location along the Columbia River. The exact coordinates are unknown. No marker was placed. The ancient one, the name used by the tribes, was gone, but many scientists argue the study was not complete. The 2015 DNA analysis answered one question but opened a dozen others. Who was population Y? What happened to them? Why do the earliest American skeletons look so different from later populations? Are there other ancient remains sitting in museum storage, unstudied and forgotten because of political pressure? The most shocking fact is that there are. Throughout the Americas, ancient skeletons have been discovered, analyzed briefly, and then locked away. Spirit Caveman in Nevada, 10,600 years old. Arlington Springs. Woman in California, 13,000 years old. Lucia Woman in Brazil, 11,500 years old. Each of these individuals shows the same pattern: ancient, morphologically distinct, and genetically connected to modern Native Americans, but with something extra, something different. The pattern is clear. The earliest Americans were not a single homogeneous group. They were diverse, both physically and genetically. But discussing that diversity has become politically impossible. Any suggestion that the first Americans were more complex than the accepted narrative is immediately labeled as racist, colonialist, or an attack on Indigenous sovereignty. This creates a conspiracy of silence, not a coordinated cover-up, but a collective agreement not to ask certain questions, not to pursue certain lines of evidence, not to challenge the approved story. And in that silence, the truth about humanity's most incredible migration, the peopling of an entire hemisphere, remains buried. So let's really talk about what this all means. Kennewick Man's DNA did not just rewrite one chapter of history. It exposed the fact that the entire book needs to be thrown out and started over. The first Americans were not a single group with a single origin. They were multiple waves, multiple populations, with different technologies, different roots, and different fates. Population Y, the ghost ancestry in Kennewick Man's genome, represents people who are gone. Their culture, their knowledge, their entire way of life has been erased from existence. We do not know their language, their beliefs, or even what they called themselves. All that remains is a faint genetic echo in the bones of a man who died 10,000 years ago. And here is what terrifies researchers. If one entire population can vanish so completely that only DNA traces remain, what else are we missing? How many other groups came to the Americas, thrived for centuries, and then disappeared before recorded history began? The genetic evidence suggests there were at least 3 major migration waves into the Americas, possibly more. Each one brought new people, new genes, and new conflicts with whoever was already here. The Kennewick Man case proves we have been telling ourselves a comforting fairy tale. The idea of a single ancestral migration, a pure, unbroken line from Siberia to every Native American tribe, is fiction. The reality is far messier, far more violent, and far more human. It is a story of competition, displacement, and survival. Some groups made it, others did not. And the final, most disturbing implication? We're still not allowed to fully investigate. The bones are buried. The questions are forbidden. And the next great discovery, the next ancient skeleton that could rewrite everything, might be sitting in a museum drawer right now, never to be studied, because the truth it contains is too controversial to face. What do you think happened to Population Y? Were they the true first Americans, wiped out by later arrivals? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more buried truths from our past.